I'm trying something new here because we're streaming, I think, not just on Twitter, or not just on YouTube, rather, but on Twitter and Twitch as well. So, again, I'm going to try, I guess, to check and see if I'm on X, I guess. I am currently live on X, but it doesn't even look like my account is up. Classic. Yeah. And then, okay, I'm not even logged into my own account. And then let's see if I'm on live on Twitch. There's also like a chat. Only chats in read only
If
mode.
I say it,
Twitch
if I
chat.
say it's slow, if I say it's slow, it makes more sense. But if I just want to say
interesting.
s'mores,
I can't
like
see the chat, but I obviously can see the YouTube chat.
there's no way you're gonna retrain my brain.
So again, we're in the
Hey guys, I'm Paul,
phase.
U.S. Army combat veteran, former MMA fighter, YouTuber, and Twitch streamer. And you found me, but I'm not live right now. However, you should definitely follow me on Twitch, twitch.tv/combatvetpaul. Join the Discord to hang out.
Okay, I wonder if there's a way. Let's see. Wonder if I can manage. Oh wait, this says go live. Okay, now I'm live again. Or I clicked it another time. Okay, I can promise you are not hearing a woman because my child is napping, or at least my female child is napping, and my wife is out getting lunch. So it is only me. Why? Okay, I'm trying to see. So I'm really trying to figure this one out. It says I have multi-chat enabled, but I don't even see, like, I know you guys can see me, right? Two Pauls, now one. Okay, is there something weird going on? Because again, I'm using this new multi-streaming software. Can you see? Am I on Twitch, I guess is the question. There's a woman voice from one of my browser tabs. Huh. I'm trying to see. Let me see. Oh, it's probably one of the ads running. Let's see. I'm just looking. I have all of these browser tabs up, so it's possible. I'm trying to see if I can find it. Oh, I bet it's stupid RT. I want to pull up some Russian propaganda stuff, and it's okay, good on YouTube. All right, everybody on YouTube is like, I see you. Cool. It's weird. This thing claims timestamps, font size, multi-chat, read-only mode. Okay, let's see. Let's see if I can find the Twitch. Okay, I'm gonna go back on Twitch and let's look again. See if I'm live on Twitch. Am I live on Twitch?
Hey guys, I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran, former MMA fighter, YouTuber, and Twitch streamer. And you found me, but I'm not live right now. However, you should definitely follow me on Twitch, twitch.tv/combatvetpaul.
This is pretty annoying. This is pretty annoying that this isn't working at all. So yeah, this is gonna drive me absolutely flipping crazy. What are settings? Audio track same as OBS. Connected. Yeah, this all looks connected. More resources. Broadcast settings. Yeah, it says I'm in Combat Vet News and then the category is gaming, but it's not. We're obviously in news. God, this is so annoying. I'm sorry that you guys are... Wait, okay, I'm seeing the stuff coming over from YouTube. Okay, looks like we've synced to YouTube. Okay. I mean, this is not, I mean, this isn't like a deliberate behind the scenes thing. This is more like this is more like a tale of, this is more a story of my software not working the way I want it to. Okay, let's see. I know this. I see everybody on YouTube. I mean, modern tech doesn't mix with modern tech. That's my theories. It says OBS setting YouTube. Okay. This is the primary output and cannot be changed. Okay, maybe there's just like a lag time of some sort. I'm still, if anybody can look at me on Twitch, be like, am I live? Am I?
Hey guys,
No,
I'm Paul, U.S. Army.
Absolutely not live on Twitch. Okay, this is, well, this is annoying. This just makes me sad and mad. Because I really am trying to get this thing like cracking. You know? Yeah, trial and error. Yeah, people like it's perfect on YouTube. Great. But again, yeah, but I don't see anyone chatting on Twitch. And again, I keep looking at Twitch here. I'll show you guys. I'll show you guys what I'm seeing on my own Twitch, right?
Hey guys, I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran.
Here's this.
Former MMA fighter.
You see, there's some friggin' thing of me from years ago, but there's no thing where I'm going live. I wonder if I need to like. Okay, hold on. You guys don't need to see this. You guys just need to be on. Maybe I need to like go live on my creator dashboard, and then it'll go from there. Am I live on Twitch or on X? Like, is it in Stream Manager? Okay. It says currently offline. Okay, shout out to the person who followed me a minute ago. But again, what is going on? Okay. Now they're saying there's two voices. Okay. I think, oh, that might be me logged into Twitch. I can't. It might be my like intro on Twitch or whatever doing its thing. All right. Well, this is kind of annoying. Wonder if I can just tell it. Okay, maybe I need to give it the stream. Let me just see. Let me just see if I can give it the stream key in settings, and we can like. And if I can't, I'm just gonna. Video encoding. Look ahead. B frames. No. Canvas settings. I'm so. This is so annoying. This is so annoying. Okay, it says there literally isn't other streams taking place right now. All right, well this is well now I'm just mad. Cuz this seems like okay, can I even get on X? I don't even know my account on X. All right. Okay. Yeah. All right. Let's, you know what? All right, we're going to chalk it up. We're going to just say, hey, this is being a mess. That's okay. We'll troubleshoot it. Let's pop out the chat. Okay. Okay. All right. All right. So you guys know the rules of this live stream, of kind of every live stream, I guess. If you have questions, you know, just drop them into chat and we'll talk about it. You can also, of course, throw me a super chat. Happy to do so. And we're going to cover a story. And then we're going to talk about, you know, we can chat about it, right? So what do you say we get into it? So here's the stories that we're talking today, right? We've got Ukraine pushing Russia all the way back into Kursk, thanks to AI, some AI-powered super drones, allegedly. We're also going to talk about Russia deploying ballistic missiles to the Poland border as a response to a NATO military exercise. But the United States, of course, is sending officers not to that exercise, but to Belarus, linking up with the Belarusian military and the Russian military, something we haven't seen in decades. And of course, we're going to talk about Netanyahu's own intelligence agency pushing back on their strike against Qatar, rather against Hamas negotiators in Qatar, and why Netanyahu overrode him. Plus, the war against Israel's war against Hamas seems to be expanding into areas that don't have anything to do with Hamas. Interesting. And of course, across social media, there's a bunch of, well, raging, seething, and coping about political violence. And you know who's cheering it? Russia and China. We're going to take a look at what Russia and China are having to say about the rise of political violence and, of course, the repeated threats of political violence from both sides. All right. Shall we talk about it? Let's do it. Okay. Let's see if I can actually finagle this. All right. Oh yeah, I forgot I gotta write stuff. Okay. Is Ukraine pushing back Russian forces into Kursk? Just why are the Russians suddenly on the back foot in multiple places on the front line? And is it because of a Ukrainian super drone? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about it. Okay, so this has been an interesting turn of events, particularly in the North Sumy and Kharkiv regions. And one of the things that we have seen very recently is an actual shift, or excuse me, in the Sumy region. And one of the things we've seen recently is that, as you guys might recall, there has been a considerable amount of Russian offensive activity in this kind of region, right? They pushed the Ukrainians out of Kursk during the Kursk incursion, but then Putin announced he was going to just keep on annexing things, and he moved into Sumy, expanding the war. And again, what we're seeing now, though, is increasingly it looks like Ukrainian forces are pushing the Russians out. You can see here where Ukrainian forces already pushed back early on near Andriivka and Kindrativka. But as we see here, we're seeing some more Ukrainian advances. Now, these aren't like stunning rollbacks, right? You're seeing Pashiri Ternia, as well as sort of pushing the Russians on the northern side of this reservoir. These aren't in and of themselves stunning reversals or anything, but what I think is significant is that this Russian action in Sumy has been a real central campaign of Vladimir Putin's, where he has really wanted to see additional Ukrainian regions pressured. And the fact that he's unable to hold these, particularly because some of this was taken by North Korea. And so seeing North Korean troops, again, North Korean troops were only fighting in the Kursk region of Russia itself. There's no evidence that they ever crossed the border into Sumy. But the fact that this is still the axis along which Russia's allies fought I think is not insignificant, right? And it still holds some symbolic meaning for Putin. Now, the takeaway, though, is again that we're seeing a reversal at all of the Russian armed forces territory seizures anywhere. So it's worth noting this is not this does not mean that it is happening everywhere across the front line. We can see, again, you're looking at Russian forces making advances in some of these other regions here, particularly in the south. But these look increasingly like Russia sort of grabbing what it can where it can. You can see that, again, the Russian main effort to encircle Pokrovsk looks increasingly like it's not really going anywhere. And now suddenly the Russians are pivoting their effort to this southern region, right near the sort of anchored by the town of Pokrovsk. And this is simply doesn't have any of the same strategic advantages that taking Pokrovsk does. This is part of the so-called fortress belt, a Ukrainian belt, really, that is anchored by Kramatorsk, Konstantinivka, and a few other towns that really form strong defensive positions that Russia has been trying to cut off and encircle for literally years. I mean, when I was in Ukraine in November, Pokrovsk was still seen as being under imminent Russian threat. So the fact that it remains free is a sign that, again, the Russian offensive is costly, but it is not effective by any stretch of the imagination. And I mean, you're talking about advances measured in tens of meters a day. And again, I want to be clear, like, let's not overstate things or state things that aren't true. This Ukrainian advance is also even less than 10 meters a day if you average it out over time. But what I want you guys to understand here is that this is a sign that, again, the Russian armed forces that purport to be vastly larger than Ukraine in terms of manpower and resources and recruitment, something isn't right, because this shouldn't be happening. Moscow, again, by their own numbers, should be growing its armed forces in Ukraine. The total, their recruitment should be outstripping losses if the official numbers are to be believed. So the fact that they are not, the fact that in places Russian forces are actually losing ground to the Ukrainians, is a sign that either something is fundamentally broken in the Russian military, something is changing in the Ukrainian military, or that the Russian sort of delusion about the state of their army is itself a lie. And any one of these is possible, but I think the real takeaway to me is that either the Russian government itself may not have accurate numbers about who is being recruited. Because remember, Russia is still an unbelievably corrupt country. And we saw at the initial invasion that Russian troops on paper had optics for every soldier, had thousands and thousands of gallons of fuel for their tanks and vehicles. But when it came time to actually see what it was in reality, where the rubber met the road, we saw that corruption had essentially looted the Russian armed forces. And why would you think that that would suddenly stop in the face of Russian recruitment, particularly when you're talking about large, lucrative bonuses? So nothing would surprise me less if you told me that the 30,000 new recruits a month were actually looking more like 15,000 or 20,000, and that large networks within Russia were exploiting the government, collecting these bonuses through fake identities and never shipping people out, bribing recruitment or other officials to kind of pass along recruits that would then just simply go AWOL and then re-enlist. There's all sorts of ways this scheme could run. But the fact that, again, a Russian armed force that is reportedly outstripping its losses in Ukraine is in fact losing ground along some of its key axes of advance is a sign that something is amiss. Now, this isn't just a story of Russian failure. This is also a story of Ukrainian innovation, because Ukraine has publicly announced that they are scaling up mass production of what they call autonomous terminal guidance, FPV drones. Now, this is something that we have talked about for some time, and the autonomous terminal guidance, the autonomous terminal guidance refers to the use of AI. Now, we've heard, for example, that Ukrainian armed forces for years have actually been rewarding units who produce video of successful drone strikes. And it seems like that is not just for propaganda purposes, but as we've been talking about on this channel, it forms the corpus of a data set that trains these strike drones to do a very specific and important thing, which is to finish the strike on key Russian targets, particularly key Russian targets in different terrain and in different times of year. And so what that does is allows it to, in effect, beat the jamming. And the description here is pretty simple. Terminal guidance technology allows the drone or missile to hit its target automatically in the final stage of its flight. Once the drone is close to the target, onboard AI enhanced sensors take over and steer it precisely without the operator controlling it, a fire and forget style strike. It will equip, one of these drone manufacturers will equip its best-selling Vyeri 10 FPV model with a TFL-1 terminal guidance module developed by a Kiev-based tech firm. And again, as they point out, there is 0% chance that this system has not been combat tested repeatedly. They say the use of our system has increased drone strike effectiveness by 2 to 4-fold, while cost rises by only 10%. And this is significant because Ukraine already has a jam-proof drone, but it is a very expensive, difficult to maneuver fiber optic drone that requires the installation of an expensive fiber optic package. It also, the heavier the spool of fiber optics are, the lighter the payload is, the lighter the munitions. So you're talking about an expensive drone, and you're talking about a drone that is very, very difficult, right? That is reduced in its effectiveness. Whereas this is a much more cost-effective system. As you can see, it makes a $500 drone only $550, because again, the thing that beats the jamming is mostly software. It requires, again, almost certainly some level of like simple graphics card to upload the machine learning software and the corpus of data that it's trained on. But you're talking about, again, $50 additional dollars onto these drone systems. And it means, again, 2 to 4-fold. So we'll use 3-fold. That means if you look at a conventional radio controlled drone, those typically have an 80 to 90% failure rate, which means that if you want to destroy one tank, you need to throw 8 to 10 drones at it. In contrast now, this would require only, you could throw as little as 2 to 3 drones to achieve a successful strike. So you're talking about just a dramatic change in scale, right? Even now with an economy of scale, I think a typical fiber optic drone with the fiber optic package is going to run you about $500 for the drone and about another $500 to $1,000 for the fiber optic spool. And that's to have a drone that can beat jamming but performs worse in the aggregate. So now you're talking about a jam beating drone that is $550 and has a larger payload or more room for other payloads too. And so that'll mean a longer range, a deeper strike capability, and the Ukrainians will also become less reliant on some of the static drone tactics where drones will simply wait in standby mode along key roadways, and they can instead strike in the time and place that it's most necessary. So again, I think this is probably part of the driver of this offensive action, because as a general rule in the military, you don't publicly discuss your newest technology until after you have exploited its surprise, the element of surprise, to the maximum, right? So again, hundreds, possibly thousands of Russians had to learn the hard way that their jammers didn't work anymore before Ukraine came out and said, oh yeah, surprise, we have this thing, it beats all jamming, so don't even worry about rolling out jamming equipment. So there is one other element that I think is pretty central to this success, and that is the systematic Ukrainian attacks on energy infrastructure, right? We've talked about the fact that part of the US's restrictions on Ukraine's war effort were not targeting Russian oil infrastructure. That was, of course, in response to U.S. inflationary pressures from 2 or 3 years ago, where inflation was very high, and there was a sense that targeting Russia's oil infrastructure would drive inflation higher still. But thanks to a slowing economy, it seems like inflation is under control globally. And there's less pressure on Ukraine from its allies to actually ensure that Russia is able to sell some of its oil and keep prices down. So given that, Ukraine has really, really, really ramped up its targeting of Russian oil infrastructure. And as a result, we've talked about the fact that civilian oil production in Russia, civilian oil availability rather, is down dramatically. Prices are very high, especially in occupied Ukraine and in remote Russian regions. In some cases, there's actually broad shortages. But that also means that there is probably a shortage within the Russian armed forces. And it may not be a literal shortage. It may simply mean increased cost. But as we've talked about, when you have increased personnel costs and increased operational costs, the Russians need to turn to newer, different strategies to kind of try to make this all work. But the Russia having to fight with less is just such a constraint that it's clear that Russia's strategy relied so much, really the linchpin was on basically infinity personnel and infinity cheap attacks with, again, fuel oil filled vehicles or fuel oil sold vehicles, right? Because remember, a lot of the Russian state funds its war through the sale of oil. So it may not even be directly like there's no gas for the quad bike. It may also be a case of there's no money for the quad bike because the Russian state was counting on selling oil to, well, places like China and India. So again, this doesn't mean that the Russian army is going to collapse overnight. But what this does mean is that what was already a pretty stalemated war is now becoming even more of a war of attrition where the battle lines aren't going anywhere. Shout out to Rocket Sailing for saying Russia might hire Greta. Yeah, all of a sudden Russia's going to be changing its stance on green energy. Probably, I suspect that its people will likely be told, guys, to fight climate change, you Russians need to start riding bicycles. Hypnokid makes a good point. Western doctrine, don't discuss till you've used it. Russian doctrine is promise the thing exists that doesn't. I mean, Russia relies so much on sort of obfuscation and confusion that it's a little bit of both, I'd say. You have Russian, the Russians love to lie about things that don't exist that do. Things that do exist, they sometimes won't talk about. But the idea, Russia relies much more on lies and confusion to just like prevent people from even trying to understand their world. Again, if you, I think a great example has been fairly recent, right? With the motive of the guy who shot the influencer, who I don't even want to name him because apparently you'll get kicked off platforms just for not being sufficiently tearful about his passing. Which, to be clear, I've made my statement. It is not good. You should not murder people. But you notice how much fake and real information has been pumped into the U.S. kind of information ecosystem. And we got to this point very quickly where you had to like throw up your hands and go, listen, we don't know anything about the guy. Let's just wait until the FBI does its investigation and sorts it all out and tells us what's up because he's right wing, he's left wing, he's crazy, he's part of this cult, he's part of that group. And there's no evidence or the evidence is like being like cut apart in all kinds of weird ways. But that feeling you have of, oh my God, there's no way we're going to ever get to the bottom of this. We can't know what's true. There's so much totally fake stuff that you just throw up your hands. That's how Russia's goal is to turn the entire information space about this war into throw up your hands. Okay. So now, I also want to mention one other thing between videos here, and that is Ukraine Aid Ops' latest fundraiser for guys in Kramatorsk. I'm going to drop it here. Fortress Kramatorsk, right? We talked about the fact that Kramatorsk is the hub of Ukrainian operations, really, in the east. And so if you want to help these guys out, they are partnering with units operating out of Kramatorsk to get them what they need the most. And, right, this is, of course, drones of all shapes and sizes, power stations, antennas, and all the basics, right? An anonymous donor has said that for every dollar we donate, they are going to match it. So the goal is 300,000. But with the double matching, right, we only have to put up 150K. What I think is kind of sick is, again, the Kramatorsk Patrol Police, which I think is pretty dope, are actually one of the patches for a $250 donation. And the next one is actually for $450 donations. They give you guys a Corvus patch, right? And I met the guys at Corvus when I was in Ukraine, and they have a really good case for being the best drone unit in the entire war. These guys are very professional. They are very good. Again, they might be the best that does it. And so reportedly their rate of loss, the rate at which they lose drones, is like lower than anyone else's. Their ability to conduct reconnaissance, move locations, like they're just great. So and plus, this is pretty sick, right? Is there anything sicker than an actual unit patch in this war whose unit patch is a quadcopter? Like, I don't know. I think it's dope. But again, I'm biased. So check it out. Link's right there. You should absolutely donate and put on the wall if you want, right? If you want, put on the wall about, that I sent you. Shout out to Thomas Howard, 258, FAFO Putin. This is for your air incursion into Poland. Kieran, Paul from Combat Veteran YouTube channel sent me here. Salva Ukraini from Payam. Kai, another Paul. Shout out to another Paul here, right? John Mikowski and Bill Smith. So I appreciate all you guys that are hooking them up. And remember, it's a 501c3 here in the U.S. It's tax deductible, right? So it's totally, completely on the up and up. Okay. Yeah, there's a lot of questions here about Poland and, are the Poles taking this Russian aggression seriously? It's hard to, it's hard to say. Okay. Oh, wait, hold on. Dropping pen. All right. Should we talk about this exercise in Belarus? I feel like we kind of have to. Is Russia deploying ballistic missiles to the Poland border? And is the U.S. rallying to support Belarus? Just why are U.S. officers cheering for our adversaries' military exercises? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Hit subscribe. Let's talk about this. So this has been a weird series of stories, but what I really wanted to mention, the first sort of piece of information I want you guys to have is that Russia is deploying its Iskander ballistic missiles. These are conventional ballistic missiles near the Polish border. You can see they are short-range ballistic missiles very frequently used in Ukraine to target cities, but occasionally to other key infrastructure. And this is something that is really difficult for Patriot missile batteries and other air defenses to shoot down. They are ballistic missiles. They're very high speed. And this is actually deployed in Kaliningrad, right near the border with Poland. And this is reportedly due to a emergency, we'll call it, exercise for NATO countries in the region. You can see here's kind of the area that the Iskander can hit, right? It includes all the Baltics, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, as well as most of Poland and parts of the Czech Republic and Slovakia. But again, Poland's launched its Iron Defender 25 military exercises, 30,000 troops, including 9,000 soldiers from the Polish 18th Mech Division alongside other NATO allies. But the drill is a strategic response to the Russian-Belarusian Zapad 2025 exercises. And I think, again, this has extra stakes because, as we talked about, 15 Russian drones violated Polish airspace in the most brazen attack on NATO territory since its founding. And I want you guys to understand that while right now, with the benefit of hindsight, we say, hey, those were unarmed drones. They didn't really have like deliberate targets per se. But remember, we only find that out after the fact. You would only find out those drones were armed when it was too late. And so this was deliberate provocation and truly an attack by Putin. Let's not mince words here, right? These were military one-way drones. They were not going to return. And even though they crashed largely into farm fields, they still required the closing of airports. And again, in some cases, appeared to be moving towards civilian airports. So, it's a little bit like if someone marches onto your house with, their hand in their waist like this, what are you going to assume that they're doing, right? You're not going to find out whether that's a Nerf gun or a real gun until it's too late. So, you would describe that as at least a strong threat, if not, and probably you would use words like trespassing, threatening, harassment, right? Crimes. And that's the international version of what Russia has done to Poland here. Now, this is why, given that context, it is extra disgusting to see American officers visiting Belarus. You know that Belarus, while not a participant in the Ukraine conflict, Belarus has been a massive, massive enabler, essentially a puppet state for the Russian government, right? Lukashenko really is very, very close to Russia and is seen in some ways as kind of a Russian reputation laundering. In fact, you may notice that in international sporting competitions, Belarusian athletes are sanctioned to the same strength as Russian athletes because they are seen as basically proxies of the Russian government. And so the fact that these exercises, which again is between the Russian and Belarusian military, had senior U.S. officers attend is absolutely insane. Now, there are representatives from 23 other countries, but only 2 of them are NATO countries, Turkey and Hungary. Notably, both of them are dominated by strongmen, right? Orban in Hungary and Erdogan in Turkey. So these are NATO countries, but they are not democracies in any kind of meaningful sense. So the USA joins these 2 member states in sending representatives. 2 U.S. officers accepted the invitation, were sent there. All right. Now, reportedly, this is in response to a Trump representative who negotiated the release of 52 prisoners from Belarusian jail, like journalists and political opponents. U.S. granted some sanctions relief to Belarus's national airline, allowing it to buy components for Boeing aircraft that it owns. But Trump said he wants to reopen the U.S. Embassy in Belarus in the near future, normalize ties, and revive the trade relationship. But again, this is a difficult to stomach because Belarus is a absolute proxy. And if you cannot sanction Russia and normalize trade with Belarus, because Belarus will just become a pipeline through which Russian goods and services get laundered and put into the global market. So again, there is no sanctioning Russia without sanctioning Belarus. But of course, Trump knows this and doesn't care because he sent Lukashenko a friendly hand-signed letter via his representative. So again, the takeaway here is that for the President Trump, it seems like perhaps the associations with Putin are becoming problematic for him, right? Even he is kissing Putin's ass a little too hard for it to be comfortable. But Lukashenko is someone whose reputation is at least distant enough from Trump that he can get away with cozying up to him. I want to show you guys here. You might notice these 2 flower-looking symbols represent that these guys are 2 lieutenant colonels. These are senior level officers, not quite flag grade, but still these are guys with nearly 20 plus years of service. And you can see here is, to give you an idea of how close the Belarusian and Russian military are, this is a Belarusian general wearing, Russian digital camo, Flora EMR. So again, just really worth noting that this is really unprecedented. I want you guys to understand how rare this is. Again, the only NATO countries attending this event are countries with extreme autocracy. And no democracy is attending these because, again, Russia, an authoritarian state, has invaded a democratic country, one that had no military designs on it. So what I think, though, is even more troubling is that Russia itself has actually shifted its stance. Because for a while, it said we have no fight with NATO. But now, Russia's saying, yeah, actually, guys, yeah, we are at war with NATO. We were not joking. So, right, Russia Russian officials, including the unhinged Dmitry Medvedev, the current Security Council deputy chairman, said on Monday that if there were a no-fly zone over Ukraine, it would be tantamount to war, which is funny because, again, Kremlin, part of the Kremlin's objectives in the war, he says it's only in the east. So why is it so important that they continue to be able to launch large-scale drone incursions over Ukrainian airspace? And Peskov said, you know what, guys, actually, this is the Kremlin's official spokesman, right, who speaks on behalf of the Kremlin itself. He said that NATO and Russia are in a de facto state of war, right? And this is pretty troubling because, again, 19 Russian drones violated Polish airspace last week, and another incident happened in Romania. So, I don't know. At some point, you have to really just confront reality, where you're talking about the official spokesman from the Kremlin says we are at war. They do a bunch of warlike things, right? They literally throw drones at NATO countries. And the only person who seems unable to articulate this problem is the president of the United States, who still maintains that, Russia is just a friendly friend that we haven't made yet, that it was an accident, a boo-boo. Again, I mean, the level of naivete to say, guys, maybe these Russian drone violations were a boo-boo. And then the literal communications director of the Kremlin goes, no, we're at war with you, NATO. We're at war. At some point, you have to sit there and go, hey, we should probably try to win. Again, it's hard to explain it. It's almost like getting attacked by someone and they're trying to kill you. You're in a fight for your life, and you still have this naive belief that you're like, well, let's talk about it. Like, as they're trying to beat you to death with a rock or something, you're like, no, we can still talk about it. We're not in a fight. It's like, no, dude, I'm hitting you. So this level of naivete, again, coming from the West, must look absolutely absurd. Absolutely absurd to Russia. Especially given that, again, imagine U.S. troops going to watch Soviet military exercises. We would be furious. That president would be impeached for sending American troops to endorse Soviet military practices. And yet, somehow, we just do it in Belarus and we don't even bat an eye. It's more evidence that the Europeans are operating with a level of naivete that is almost comical, almost absurd to an unbelievable degree, that the White House is either actively supporting Russian efforts or simply so inept, so clueless, so stupid that they are unable to even accept plain facts stated by the Russians themselves. But in either case, it is good news for Russia and bad news for the democracies and free peoples of the world. All right. Okay. Not drama. Are the latest provocations in NATO an attempt to legitimize a general draft? With shortage of new recruits, would Putin try to force NATO into an offensive action so we can have a general mobilization? Well, the problem is NATO has no designs on... NATO is a defensive alliance. They have no desire to invade Russia or conduct any kind of combat action against Russia. It's not even clear they would want to roll back Russian gains in Ukraine. In all likelihood, they would try to, again, do something like what Medvedev was talking about, a sort of a no-fly zone, some kind of air support to Ukrainian armed forces, like something else like that. I think this would be that would be more likely from NATO. I don't think Putin would do a general draft because, again, the unpopularity of the war. Like, he still can't square the fundamental reality that this is a war of choice. Ukraine was never a meaningful threat to Russia. And if we know that as sort of external observers here in the West. But remember, Putin has spent 20 years selling the Russian people on the strongman deal. And the strongman deal is very simple. They say you lose freedoms, you lose some economic growth, you lose, again, free speech, the right to decide who is in charge of your country. You lose an independent judiciary. Instead, you have a kind of legal system that exists to enable the strong man and his allies. But in exchange for all of that corruption, the deal goes, you get a strong man. You get a nation that is not weakened by the rule of law, weakened by a commitment to individual rights and liberties. You get absolute iron-fisted strength. So Putin has this devil's bargain where he goes, either Ukraine was an imminent threat and a tiny neighboring nation that posed little threat was actually a grand threat because Russia's so weak, or this isn't actually a defensive fight against Ukraine. He says, well, this is actually a war of choice and a war of conquest. But he can't have both, messaging-wise. And so I think for Vladimir Putin, a draft would require saying to the public, yeah, not like this was a war of conquest and it's not going well, or this is a defensive war, but we can't show you how. Do you see what I mean? Five UFO, China's doing proxy warmongering against democracies. Ding, ding, ding. That's right. The only person who, again, doesn't know this is the White House. China is very explicit that they are backing Russia in this because, again, for China, they get to essentially militarize their economy, evolve an economy that can fight and win against NATO-backed forces, NATO tactics and NATO equipment. So this mass drone, these tactics, these are all things that for China, not only are they watching the NATO alliance essentially get broken apart, but they also get to watch in real time as they also get to prepare their own country for the logistical, the economic, the cultural ramifications of a war. It's like getting to watch. It's like having a surgeon bring them in and watching another surgeon do an advanced type of surgery that's never been done before, right? That's the best way to train. You can read, you can discuss, you can think about it, but for China, they are getting to watch in real time as a country that isn't them has to take on an annex territory from a NATO, an American-backed ally. They're very interested and they are very happy, particularly because a lot of these deals they're making with Russia, Russia's in a pretty desperate spot. And so these deals can be very, very lucrative, right? They've negotiated very cheap oil sales via pipeline into China. They have essentially given Chinese firms the opportunity to buy up the debt and get leverage over major Russian companies like Rosatom. These are all very good outcomes for China. So China is really salivating at how good this is going for them. Yeah, KP talking about the Department of State from 2013. Yeah, so up until the Russian annexation of Crimea, there was what we call a lot of transparency exercises. And this was to say, listen, to prove to Russia, hey, these aren't military exercises. They're not aggressive. These are defensive things. In a lot of cases, the adversary in these theoretical exercises isn't even Russia-like. They're counter-terror exercises or counter-chemical weapons exercises. And that transparency program was seen as essential to sort of building goodwill and trust within the Russian Federation to say, listen, look, NATO is a defensive alliance. We understand that a lot of countries near you request membership because they're obviously afraid of you taking them over, probably because you took a bunch over, right? But in 2014, for all of that work, for all of that friendliness and hand-wringing and transparency, Russia still took over part of Crimea. And the West said, well, now, like, now obviously everyone's going to want to become a NATO member because they don't want to get Crimea'd, just like they didn't want to get Georgia'd in 2008. So, like, this, do you not see how this, you yourself are encouraging this kind of behavior? And so after 2014, the West was like, listen, it's obvious. You are like the Baltics, they're not paranoid. You really are this person. You really want to just conquer other territories. We are not going to endorse you. We are now like on a hostile footing relative to you. Ricardo, do you think Trump is working with Putin behind everyone else's back? I don't know. If we saw the same meeting in August, it's not really behind anyone's back. He rolled out the red carpet. Putin conceded nothing, gave Trump nothing, changed nothing about his stance or policy. And Trump gave him a big slap on the back and said, we'll see you later, man. And then, I get it, Trump sanctioned India with 50% tariffs, but India obviously wasn't affected by it at all. Said, fuck right off. And then again, Trump now has turned around and said, oh, if you want us to help Ukraine, all NATO countries need to stop buying Russian oil. Well, Putin knows that's not going to happen. So, again, we just talked about Turkey and Hungary need Russian oil, and they like Russia. So, yeah. All right, you guys want to talk about Netanyahu? Let's do it. Let's do it. Let's get canceled. Let's make sure I never have another sponsor again. Hit subscribe. Israel's controversial strike on Hamas negotiators in Qatar was opposed by an unlikely member of Netanyahu's cabinet. But just why did the Israeli prime minister steamroll his own cabinet members? Plus, is the Israel war on Hamas expanding to areas that aren't even controlled by Hamas? The U.S. is high-fiving them for all of it. Let's get into it. I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Hit subscribe. All right, so this is crazy because Mossad, the Israeli intelligence arm, actually refused to target Hamas officials in Qatar, according to leaked information, right? And this makes sense because, as you might recall, my reaction to this strike was absolute consternation because it made no sense. And for the exact reasons that Mossad says this makes no sense. The original plan that was, Israel said, Mossad, we want you to use your ground agents to assassinate Hamas officials in Qatar. This is according to the Washington Post. Israel instead ended up launching airstrikes on Qatar, saying they targeted senior Hamas leaders. Now, Mossad actually appeared to have not even signed on to any of these Israeli statements because the Mossad chief opposed the strike, partly because such an action could rupture the relationship he and his agency had cultivated with the Qataris. Qatar has hosted Hamas and mediated ceasefire talks. So if the Israeli goal is to return those hostages via a negotiated settlement, something that is the only way any of these hostages have been returned alive, literally to date, the IDF has rescued 0 of their hostages using military operations. So it's fair to say that the negotiations were the vehicle to get back Israeli hostages, which they say is the primary motivation for the war. Well, part of negotiations is having a place where they happen. And so the Qataris went to Hamas. They said, listen, we're Qatar. We just gave a $400 million jet to President Trump. We have tremendous investments that are linked to Trump allies like Jared Kushner and his wife, Ivanka Trump. And we also have assurances from the United States that we are a sovereign nation and we are an independent country that is not going to be targeted in this way. The Qataris also point out, they say, listen, Doha hosted the Taliban government or at least emissaries from the Taliban government for 20 years. When the U.S. itself needed to do a deal with the Taliban, they approached the Taliban in Qatar. That's where these negotiations happened. And so Hamas says, yeah, we believe you. We think that we will have our representatives in Qatar in order to conduct these negotiations. And these are, by the way, U.S.-backed negotiations. Steve Witkoff routinely travels to Qatar to do his negotiations, which, again, have gone nowhere because Steve Witkoff is terrible at his job. But these are still, this is a U.S. envoy backing this effort. And so you know it's bad when even Mossad is like, guys, we have worked really hard with the Qataris to make sure that they are like the Switzerland. They're like the Casablanca of the Middle East, a place where you guys can go, where you can be safe, and your representatives can discuss important issues, deconflict, that sort of stuff. And Israeli intelligence, don't kid yourselves, Israeli intelligence and their agents absolutely work with the Qataris, absolutely work with the Saudis, absolutely work with the Egyptians. They all have plenty of mutual enemies. And again, the Qataris are happy to host all of it. And so, the fact that Netanyahu was told by Mossad, listen, don't do this. You're literally targeting the negotiations here. And not only did Mossad say, don't do this, the IDF forces chief actually also opposed the, quote, timing of the strike, right? And though the strategic affairs minister and defense minister supported Netanyahu, right? But of course, the senior IDF officer in charge of hostage negotiations was not even invited because they knew he would be like, no, because I'm negotiating with these people. I have personally guaranteed their safety in conducting these negotiations. So you got to understand that the level of violation of international norms being committed by basically Netanyahu alone. This is the preposterous part. Do you know, like, Mossad is not a fan of Hamas, okay? Mossad is not soft on Hamas. For them to be like, this is not serving our own strategic objectives. Like, why? Why would you do this? As they point out, Mossad was like, listen, if we don't like these individual guys, we can get them in a year, we can get them in 2 years, we can get them in 4 years. And we won't have to do it during negotiations. Mossad knows how to do it. He said, why do it now? And of course, the result has blown up the relationships in the Middle East. Qatar condemned the strike as state terrorism and a betrayal of the mediation process. Right? They've said, of course, that this strike is in response to a Hamas attack on Jerusalem that killed 4 soldiers in Gaza. What? It doesn't make any sense. But again, and of course, Netanyahu's like, remember the 9/11 attacks, right? But again, as we point out, the U.S. negotiated with the Taliban representatives in Qatar. They respected the places where diplomacy happens. Now, here's the thing. Despite it actively working against the U.S.'s interest, the U.S. stated goal of getting the hostages returned, reaching some kind of Hamas-free Gaza Strip solution, as ghoulish as some of the U.S. options look like, you know, bulldozing people's homes and building casinos, Netanyahu and Marco Rubio, of course, Rubio went to Israel and just absolutely showed that the U.S., we are behind you 100%. Despite literally a strike on a U.S. ally, one that paid a lot of money to enrich the president with their donation of a new Air Force One, Rubio went out there and said, Qatar, suck it. It sent a message. Yeah, that message is we don't respect the diplomatic process. Right? Especially because Hamas is like, guys, you didn't actually kill the people you tried to kill. Rubio says, quote, the strike didn't fail because it had one central message and we considered it before we launched it. And that is, you can hide, you can run, but we'll get you. This is from, oh, sorry, that was Netanyahu. They weren't hiding. They were negotiating. They were negotiating in the Qatari capital. Of course, they killed the 5 members of Hamas and a Qatari security officer, right? But failed to take out Hamas's top brass. Basically, the fear, as we've talked about, is that the the Abraham Accords, this is something that Trump has been really viewed as a linchpin of his sort of peace first agenda, are absolutely blown up by this. This is just a level. The no Middle Eastern government is going to be able to do a deal with the Israelis for this reason. And the Israelis are trying to sort of help the U.S. out. They're saying this was a wholly independent decision by Israel. We assume full responsibility. We did it on our own, period. But if that were true and they said, listen, this was our call, then the U.S. would say, okay, well, we condemn it. But instead of condemning it, again, we see Marco Rubio out here kissing the fucking wall. Look. And, oh yeah, to make it worse, according to Axios reports, the Israelis are like, listen, we're also going to annex the West Bank. Now, for those of you that have missed it, have missed the last 2 years, Hamas is a political entity that operates in the Gaza Strip. The West Bank is governed by the somewhat more moderate PLO, right? They're different political entities. They actually don't like each other. It's been a core part of the Israeli strategy to be like, hey, we'd like having two entities in the two different areas that are considered Palestine. Because obviously, the less they can collaborate and coordinate on strategy, the worse their negotiating position is. And part of the argument for moderation by people like the PLO has been, listen, we're not Hamas. The Israelis are not going to go after us. We're not trying to like purge Israel from existence. We're moderate. We are safer. We are allowed to live in greater economic prosperity, relatively speaking, than the Gazans because we don't endorse their level of violence. So you understand how incredibly, incredibly problematic it is and radicalizing it'll be if the IDF says, actually, we're just going to take over the West Bank. Because most of the international community view the West Bank as occupied and would consider Israeli annexations illegal and inflammatory. The UAE has warned that the annexation of the West Bank would basically destroy the UAE-Israel peace treaty and all of the Abraham Accords entirely. And this is in response to, of course, the UN General Assembly passing what they call the New York Declaration, which is a bunch of feel-good words that say that definitely one day there'll be a Palestinian state. 142 countries voted in favor, 10 voted against them, including America and Israel, with 12 countries abstaining. But what I want you guys to understand, again, two Israeli officials said that Rubio signaled in private meetings he doesn't oppose West Bank annexations. The Trump administration won't stand in the way. And the Trump administration, of course, is like, listen, we don't know what our issue is on this because this is absurd. This has never happened before. This has never been a discussion. This is so escalatory. So, you know, this is obviously a problem for the reasons we just talked about. It's also a dangerous escalation. It also throws it really just exposes the fact that the Israel justification for the initial Gaza operation was we're going to war with Hamas, the political entity. We're not going to war with the citizens of Gaza. That has been almost comically disproven. We're not going to war with the Palestinians of the West Bank. But now you're talking about taking over the West Bank. So who aren't you at war with? Again, this is one of those things where it's like if your goal, and again, I'm not going to argue one way or the other whether or not this is like the G word. But if your goal, if you're worried about the international community viewing you as committing the bad G word, this is not the action you would take. Again, this is just not the action you would take. Any analogy I do is going to be pretty inadequate. But if you take away anything from this, please understand that this is, again, a sign of increasing escalation in the conflict, increasingly dangerous, increasingly deadly, and expanding in scope rapidly. And this White House seems to have just such a limited grasp, a limited ability as negotiators to actually curtail this. It's not even clear they want to. It's not even clear they care. Okay. All right. Oh boy, there's a lot of chats. That's okay. Thank you to Seven Dust. Rachel Corrie is greater than Ashley Babbitt. I don't know what that means. And I'm not going to Google it. Chris Rathouse. I'm sick of feel-good words for Ukraine. Action needs to be taken. Yeah, you and me both, dude. I think from 91 to today, I think the world, like, people failed to realize just how much the United States and its State Department and its military and economic might was tamping down conflicts that would force the developed world to look around and go, oh shit, we live in a world where strong words and condemnation don't actually achieve things. And that is how things have always been. But the reality is that you can have all the feel-good stuff inside your country about your system and your commitment to human rights and your commitment to pluralism and democracy and multi-party politics. But if your country cannot muster the force sufficient to defend itself from aggressors in the era in which you live, then they don't matter. None of those things matter, right? KP, the soft response from NATO because inventories of personnel aren't ready is exactly it. NATO, again, look, Russia brings in 30,000 troops, fresh troops from the meat grinder every month, and it basically exterminates all of them. The Europeans, when asked, collectively, the whole EU, how many peacekeepers can it provide, who will take no casualties, by the way, they were able to say, well, hypothetically, we maybe could get 30,000 between all of us. And with no replacements, right? So understand, that is how under-equipped, how anemic the European countries are. And there's also like a cultural rot here. The average French worker earns less than the average French retiree because of the generous French pension system. And a lot of these countries, right, in one survey, they found 50% of Germans didn't think Germany was worth fighting for, which is insane. Like, imagine, again, China marching, like invading the U.S. West Coast or invading Hawaii. And the Americans going, China, America, all these governments are all evil and corrupt. You'd be like, no, dude, one of these governments is an ethno-nationalist, like, communist dictatorship, dudes. Like, one of them you have free speech and one you don't. Like, they're going to kill you all. They'll disappear you. They'll put you in camps. Like, again, not like the edgy sort of like, oh, these are camps. Like, no, China actually has like unironic re-education camps. Like, it's just not something that's in the American psyche. But yeah, the fact that there's, again, this like cultural rot of like, well, I never had to defend or ask questions about like, what does it mean to be German? What does it mean to be European? What is the value of democracy? What does it mean to have human rights? Like, no, if you can't articulate that, if you've never had to actually ask that question, to be like, hey, really? No, really, there's another country that doesn't have human rights or laws that mean anything or a free economy in any way, no pluralism, no multi-party, and they want to take your country over. Do you think your country is worth defending? That is just that's just a question that again, for so long, the developed world has just never had to conceive. They've never had to conceive it. And that's why you get a lot of these people who use like big boy edgy words to describe the West. They'll be like, oh, America is just another imperialist power. It's funny because, like, go to Ukraine, man. See what annexation and real imperialism looks like. Yeah, is there some coercive like trade agreements between small countries and the United States? Sure, yeah. Does the U.S. but it is not imperialist conquest, okay? And it's like disrespectful to actual imperialism victims to like use those words. Do I think Europe would stand up if they were invaded? My guy, Ukraine is in Europe. They were actually invaded. So we have our answer. Joe's land. For archaeological digs in the West Bank, Gaza, under tablets with Hebrew text on it. Whose land is it? The land belongs to the people that live there. I don't know what else to tell you. That is my philosophy. Yeah. The right of human beings to have a home, to live in a place, to decide how they want to be governed, the laws under which they live, is like, it's not a fundamental human right because those things don't exist, but that is like a fundamental moral and political good. Seven notes. USA cops are allowed to lie, but aren't allowed to you mean lie to them? See, yeah, that's another good example, right? In Russia, do you think you can beat Russian cops on like by pleading the fifth? No. USA cops, by the way, guys, FYI, we have he doesn't understand. You can plead the Fifth Amendment to any question a cop asks you. And you can also say the magic words, hey, I want a lawyer at any time. And you don't have to be like, I want my lawyer. You just got to say, hey, I got to call my lawyer before I answer any more questions. I think you have to provide a driver's license. Like, there's very limited forms of like things you have to provide to police, but it's very basic. It's like driver's license, probably just driver's license, right? You may be required to provide like the registration on your car, but even now they just run it to plates and they just see if you're current. You don't have to have the paper registration or paper insurance. So, again, these are rights that don't exist in China. Like if a policeman wants to search your house or your car or take your stuff, if the state wants it, they just do it. There isn't recourse. There isn't going to be a judge who goes, well, now this Chinese cop, you didn't behave. The judge is like, listen, I'm just the next step on the train. The cop says you did something, and then he brings you to me, and I decide, hey, here's how much you did. Here's your punishment. That's how it is. Not always, right? For minor stuff, I'm sure you can like prove your case and get off, but nothing that matters. Nothing that matters where the state is a real party. And that's the difference. Like in America, look, you can be a day laborer migrant like Abrego Garcia, and the government can do shit to you. And if you get a lawyer, you can stand there in court and say the government screwed up and they have to bring me back. I have a right X and Y and Z, and the government can lose. That's the difference. Russia can't lose. The Russian government, Vladimir Putin doesn't lose court cases. Not to fucking normies and losers. Not to regular citizens. Xi Jinping and the Chinese government, they don't lose court cases. They don't do illegal shit. The government decides what illegal shit is. And people act like, oh, we're just like Russia. We're just like Russia. Even the president. The president's like, well, why can't I do anything I want? I'm the president. I'm like, because you're not the Russian president. But there is something special about democracy and the rule of law and the rights of individuals and liberties. Like, these things are not meaningless. They're not things you put on a fucking shirt. All right, we got one more we're gonna talk about, and I gotta get out of here. I don't even know how many people are are watching along with us. Nice, cool, dope. All right, let's talk about it. This, oh boy, let's get canceled, shall we? American social media is erupting with discussions about the nature of political violence and dangerous rhetoric. But two of America's biggest adversaries are loving it and are encouraging Americans to tear each other apart. Just why are Russia and China all in on the Charlie Kirk assassination. I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about it. So, according to Utah Governor Spencer Cox, he has said America's adversaries, like Russia and China, are trying to encourage violence by spreading disinformation online in the wake of the killing of conservative commentator Charlie Kirk. And he appealed to the public to say, listen, don't let them get to you. Now, to be clear, the elected leadership of both parties has strongly condemned the political violence and the killing of a political commentator like Charlie Kirk. Again, universally. We looked it up when it happened, from AOC and Bernie Sanders to Nancy Mace and President Trump. They've all said, well, almost everyone has said that political violence has no place in our system, that we need to allow justice to work, and that this is not who we are as a country. But social media posts are amplifying some extreme voices, and it's doubly so given that America's adversaries, this is red meat for them. It serves their objectives so much when Americans call for violence against the other side, right? He said, quote, "We have bots from Russia, China, and all over the world that are trying to instill misinformation and encourage violence. I would encourage you to ignore those, turn off those streams." He said more information would be released later. Now, what I think is interesting is that I want to point out some of the Russian messaging. Now, when we go to Russian messaging, we can't know what the Russian bots are pushing because it's a cat and mouse game, and we won't know we've caught the mouse until somebody tells us about it, right? Again, U.S. intelligence agencies probably are putting out these bulletins about who's pushing what kind of narratives. But what we can do is tell sort of the narratives that these governments are pushing, because we can look on their publicly facing websites, right? For Russia, this is the site RT. Now, RT has a bunch of videos that are, or a bunch of articles that are meant to push a couple of narratives, right? Including the West is weak, the West is the actual aggressor in Ukraine. The U.S. is failing and also unbelievably mean, and right-wing movements are good and awesome. But again, you can see there's two different articles here, opinions saying how good Britain's Unite the Kingdom rally is, which again, I don't think it's because Russia believes that stuff. I think they just have a sense in general that these right-wing movements within these countries are less confrontational towards Russia. But what I thought was interesting is there is one article, for example, that was in RT recently, basically saying that the boomers love political violence, and that they love cracking down on the evil system, right? They love political violence, and political violence is awesome, essentially, right? Talk about this boomer derangement syndrome, and just... Again, it's hard to even pull together this, but you can see here, there's another op-ed that again is obviously trying to inflame U.S. fissures, trying to put a racial spin on the killing of a Ukrainian refugee by an American, right? Making the kind of preposterous claim that the murder was ignored because the victim is white and the killer black, which is sort of comical because, well, frankly, we heard all about it until the next killing. But you can see, again, there's RT covering, linking this killing to other hot button issues, and really emphasizing just sort of the key divisions within the country, finding these really hot button points that really inflame passions and just trying to dig their finger into it. And you can see the Chinese have an even more explicit policy, where here is from the South China Morning Post, a Chinese government English language news arm, essentially saying the opinion of a Chinese writer that says, listen, this killing of American commentator Charlie Kirk, he goes, this is a natural outgrowth of America's broken nationalism. He says, American nationalism is rooted, this is from the article, quote, rooted in the mythos of liberty, individualism, and moral exceptionalism. From the founding fathers to modern populist movements amplified by Hollywood, mass media, and algorithmic echo chambers, patriotism is expressed as a belief in one's values are inseparable from the nation's identity. He says this is volatile. It thrives on personal grievance, elevates the individual to ideological warrior, and erodes the space for compromise, right? And then he continues to be like, look, there are firings, online abuse, disputes over flag protocol. It's a society where political identity is existential. The flag itself, once a unifying symbol, is now a litmus test of allegiance. You see how China's gloating over this? Now, look at this. In contrast, China's nationalism is structured and collective. It emphasizes unity and shared purpose. Patriotism is a civic responsibility. National narrative is shaped by historical experience and cultural continuity, encourages alignment with broader social goals. This model is a kind of cohesion that democracies struggle to maintain. It is strategic and deeply rooted in historic memory and framed around aspirations for national rejuvenation. Communist Party's emphasis on harmony comes at the expense of heterodoxy, right? And this is, I want you guys to understand, this is exactly what China wants. China wants this in the worst way. They want to be able to say, they love pointing to America and saying, look, their society, they say their democracy makes them strong. They say their free speech makes their ideas better and bigger and higher quality. They say that they're powerful and rich because they have these. But then whenever there's something like this, they get to go, look, these guys want to kill each other. They hate each other. They go, can you imagine us Chinese living in a country where we want to hate each other and kill each other? They go, this is obviously a fundamental flaw in the way Americans think and operate that we Chinese simply don't have. And this is not just directed at China, but they also say, listen, they believe it. They think it's true. They're like, this is, like, America is weaker because they all want to kill each other. And they're like, China's strength is in its unity of effort. And again, it's one of those things that is hard to argue because, well, it's a rather, I don't believe it's true, but there is plenty of evidence, right, where China says, listen, we have this 100-year national goal. You Americans only try to live your lives one election at a time or one media cycle at a time. And for all the flaws, right, China has to contend with the reality that China doesn't have a mass migration problem, not because they're not welcoming the migrants, because nobody wants to go there because they're a brutal place to live and they are limited, deeply limited in economic opportunity. It's nothing like the United States. We are the beacon of opportunity for the entire world. And we are orders of magnitude. The average American worker is more productive, more capable than any other worker on planet Earth. They are freer to start a business. They are freer in speech. We can say almost anything in this country and the government won't stop us. You can literally, I mean, look, Kanye can go on fucking TV and say some pretty horrific stuff. And so I point these things out because China doesn't want these to be true. Russia doesn't want these things to be true. It's so uncomfortable for the Chinese and for the Russians because they say, listen, our strength, our economic power is in the fact that we don't have these kinds of issues, that we are a unified, under a single strong man who silences dissent, who crushes individual liberty, who, does these things for the benefit of the collective. And everyone in that country has to look and say, well, then why is the United States bigger and more powerful? And part of it is because we are politically diverse, but we have a unifying ethos. Again, the stuff outlined in the Bill of Rights, the Constitution, and the American mandate, right? This commitment to a freer, more prosperous society. The problem that you get into is that the president himself seems to disagree. And this is what I think was pretty fucked up. So on Fox and Friends, he went on, this is the right-wing news network Fox, their morning show, Fox and Friends, they asked the president a pretty puff piece question. They said, how can Americans come back together to fix this country after the fatal shooting in Utah on Wednesday that conservatives have blamed on Democrats and the media? And Trump appeared, but Trump said, bring the country together. He said, quote, "I'll tell you something that's going to get me in trouble, but I couldn't care less." The president said there are radicals on both sides of the political spectrum, but he said the radicals on the left are the problem. Trump said, quote, "They're vicious, they're horrible, and they're politically savvy. Although they want men and women's sports, they want transgender for everyone, they want open borders." Right. And he also was like, radicals on the right just want less crime. And this is troubling for a bunch of reasons. First off, I understand that this sort of messaging about like trans everything or whatever gets votes, but that's absolutely not the case. Again, they want men and women's sports. I don't know or care. I don't know what they want transgender for everyone. I don't know what that means, but open borders, again, Joe Biden deported more people than Donald Trump has. Trump still can't meet Biden's deportation numbers because Biden actually had people in his organization who knew how the deportation system works. Joe Biden holds the record for the most deportations ever done. And remember, he kept the border shut, by the way, through all of COVID. And actually, the Supreme Court had to actually come out and say, hey, Joe Biden, you have to reopen the border. You cannot just simply declare a national emergency for for 3 straight years. So reality and Trump's reality just have nothing to do with each other. Just like the reality that's saying, oh, well, radicals on the conservative movement are simply people who don't like crime. The radical left have compared wonderful Americans like Charlie to Nazis and the world's worst mass murderers and criminals. That kind of rhetoric is directly responsible for the terrorism that we're seeing in our country today. Right? Representative Bob Onder blamed politicians, the media, and quote, all the rats out there for the shooting, while Onder called leftist ideology pure evil. So again, what I always point out is that when there are right-wing shooters in places, again, like El Paso or the synagogue shooting in Pittsburgh, or, you know, even the death of those 2 lawmakers just 4 months ago, Democratic lawmakers, where the shooter was an anti-abortion activist who, again, had a giant kill list of other left-wing politicians. There was no politician who said shit like this, who said, well, right-wing ideology is pure evil. No. At most, the phenomenal racism of some of those shooters is pure evil, but that's something that even, again, the average American right-wing person is not like a white supremacist. But what I also want to point out is that Trump himself is wrong about right-wing radicals. They are not simply people who don't like crime. And I point to one of the people who has gotten embroiled into this is right-wing shitposter podcaster Nick Fuentes, who has been banned from every single platform, whose political views are so horrific by almost any civilized nation standards that I can't describe them on this channel. You can go to his Wikipedia page, and the best analogy I can give you is that Nick Fuentes believes that the best government for the United States of America and the best social contract is one modeled after the Taliban in Afghanistan, except being Christian instead of, in fact, he praised conservative religious aspects of the Taliban governance. So again, you cannot sit there and be like, well, extremists on the right just don't like crime. It's like, yeah, but he defines crime as existing while something other than white. So understand that this move of massive political violence, of which Trump is endorsing, Trump is absolutely endorsing this. Listen, the Republican Party is not pure evil, okay? That is not a belief I have. That is not a belief that the other politicians in the United States have endorsed. It just isn't. Do I think some of their policies are like kicking the poor in the teeth? Yeah. Do I think some of them are lining their own pockets to the expense of the country? Yeah, for sure. For sure. Do I think they're bad at their job? Yeah, definitely. By and large. Again, I call the bright moments when I see them. But I would never call them pure evil, right? Because that is divisive rhetoric that inspires people to violence. But somehow, it's fine when the president does it. It's fine when he says, I don't care about national unity. It's fine when he says, I want to purge leftism from the fucking world. Yeah. So anyway, guys, hit subscribe. I'll see you in the next one. be decent to each other. All right. Oh man, I don't even know. Yeah. KL, there is no GOP, just MAGA. Yeah, I remember, man. I always joke when people are like, you're so leftist. I'm like, no, I'm like a Republican from like 1997. Yeah, I actually think the only thing I'll caveat, I'll say this. I think the people in the Epstein files are pure evil. That's what I think. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Like, again, you have only two sides in this country of belief, it seems like, according to the president. You have pure MAGA, which is everything he says is great and perfect. And then you have every other belief system, which is leftist schlock, which is not that. I mean, again, normally, in normal times, you can't run a country that way, right? You need to build coalitions around it. But somehow, like, again, thanks to MAGA, thanks to social media, thanks to friendly organizations like Fox News, you just have this widespread cult mentality. Anyway, George W. was better than Trump because he respected the rule of law, and programs like PEPFAR were actually helped the poorest people. I think Bush actually like believed in conservatism. I think he believed in like hyper free markets. I think he thought they were going to be good for people. Yeah, George Bush had beliefs, and he didn't want to actively destroy American institutions. I think his stuff around the Florida elections was like pretty suspicious, and unfortunately, like his willingness to like push the Florida election issue, the better man, the person who wanted to ensure things like national unity and Al Gore blinked first. He thought it was right for the country. Oh, you're right. W. Sorry, wrong W. No, HW was Bush Sr. HW is Bush Sr. Yeah, the Patriot Act. Yeah, Trump has made Bush look better in hindsight because Bush had like a consistent ideology. And again, like, yeah. And again, Bush tried to conduct like real foreign policy. Trump is just dumb. He's just dumb. And for a while, I was like, Trump's stupidity is the reason he's less of a threat to our country's institutions. But now his stupidity is actually like kind of destroying them because he puts in so many succulents. Okay, I gotta wrap this thing up, man. It's getting late. Guys, we are helping out the units in Ukraine who are holding the line against Russian aggression. In Kramatorsk, units like Azov, the Lyut Brigade, are fighting tooth and nail against Russian advances, and in places, they're even driving the Russians back. So we're going to help them out. They are holding the fortress city of Kramatorsk, place that I've personally been to, and best of all, an anonymous donor is matching 100%. Every dollar you give will be matched by an anonymous donor. So help them out. The link to the fundraiser is in the description. It's a US 501c3, and donors can get hooked up with different rewards at different tiers, including a patch from the Kramatorsk Patrol Police, which is kind of sick. Patch from the guys at the Corvus of the unit of the 93rd Brigade. These are one of the best drone units in the entire Ukrainian military. Guys I have also personally met. So check it out and help them out. Plus, a huge thank you to the Colonel tier members of Combat Vet News, guys like AL90, James Porsche, Steve Moran, Doug Beck, Alex Williams, Henry Roussier, as well as all of our Lieutenant tier members. Couldn't do it without you guys. Thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers. Okay, and thank you guys that joined us. I appreciate you, and I will catch all you guys in the next one. Cheers. Oh my God, can I end this software? Let's see.